Between 1945 and 1985, for those 40 years, the world was controlled by two great powers, the Soviet Union, United States. It was like a game of chess, played like chess according to rigid rules with leaden accuracy. Every now and then, yes, things went wrong. The Cuban Missile Crisis almost destroyed the world, fascinating moment. But for much of the time, everyone played the rules. And all the lesser powers in the world, whoever they were, Indonesia, Egypt, Brazil, had to follow those rules and fit into one of those armed camps. But in 1985, that changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. I was very lucky as a young person. I was there to see the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1991, I gave up my job. I'd been a spectacularly disastrous investment banker, hopeless. You can imagine how useless I was. And suddenly, the one thing that I'd always wanted to happen was happening. The Soviet Union was falling. I gave it up, and I went straight to become a war correspondent. And I was lucky to see all the kind of great conflicts that came out of the fall of the Soviet Union. We thought the conflicts were over, but they weren't. They're still going on. But there's no greater training for a young historian than to see a great empire fall, and that's what I saw. But after 1985, for the next 25 years, America was the mega power. America was the paramount power in the world. And I think we'd probably agree, if we discussed it in detail, that America somehow squandered that supremacy in a series of ways. But the most significant was the wars after 9/11, and particularly the Iraq War. And after 2016, the American paramountcy ended, and we entered into a different era, the era we're living in now. It's usually dated to the election of Trump, but you can also date it to the election of Obama. Both were in their ways utterly disastrous. And we'll talk about the presidential election in a minute, perhaps. But from that point on, it changed. If the American paramountcy was like a game of solitaire, just as the Cold War had been a game of chess, now we're living in a multiplayer computer game. Many powers are now important. Powers like Brazil, for example. Across the world, new powers have risen. I call them continental powers because they're not superpowers. Between superpowers and continental powers, there are empire states, states like Turkey and Iran, and India to a certain extent, that are seeking to emulate the glories of earlier empires, great empires that they had. I mean, don't forget, for example, the Iranian Empire. Iran, before October 7th, today's Iranian Islamic Republic was the most successful Iranian power with its arc of proxy colonies almost that went from Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. It was the most powerful the Iranian state had been since the Sasanian Empire in the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th centuries AD, so for a long time. And of course, if we're seeking to understand the Iranian regime, it's not just a religious regime, it's also the successor to these great empires. But there are other powers too. And you look at the world, you look, for example, to see the world that we're living in right now. Look at the civil war in Sudan. Different sides are being backed by a whole range of powers that would never have had an armed foreign policy before. The Saudis, the UAE, the Qataris, the Turks, the Iranians, the Israelis. All of these people are backing different sides. Not to speak the Russians and the Americans, and the Chinese. Chinese are a new arrival at the top rank of powers. India is the next superpower. And below them are these continental powers. Some are small, like United Arab Emirates. Some are huge, like Brazil.